So I have been sitting on making this video for months now, just because of the nature of it, because I think that it is a very vulnerable video to make. I think that it's also a little controversial. So I've been sitting on it and sitting on it, but I am coming up on my annual gynecology exam tomorrow, and I'm going to have to talk about it anyway. And I've talked about it with friends and family, but as someone, excuse me, with PCOS, I think that it's important to talk about all different aspects. And I know that when I was going through this issue, I searched everywhere. I Googled every term under the sun, and there were no concrete answers to my questions. So back in January, February, I had gone through my divorce. I had filed for divorce and was just kind of still going out a lot with friends. And I ended up having, I wouldn't even necessarily call it a one-night stand, because it's a friend that I'm still friends with and that I've talked to since. I knew him before, and I think it was just a comfort thing. So I just decided to make the decision to be a little reckless in a safe way. So I was reckless, but as safely reckless as I could be. So I chose to sleep with a friend, and in my very drunken state, I had assumed that when he left the room, he went to get protection, and I found out the day after that he did not. So, very angry, angry situation for me to go through. Very upset, ripped him a new one over and over again. However, I made the choice to take the morning after pill. So a couple of things, not cheap, and it was a hard decision to make, but I did a lot of research on what it did, and it just really makes it impossible in the event that you possibly could be pregnant. It makes it impossible for an egg to implant. So having PCOS, clearly I do not ovulate or ovulate much. However, that being said, I had gone through my whole dieting experience for my irritable bowel syndrome. And as a result of that, I had lost some weight and I had had a period on my own. So there was no way of knowing. And that's one of the things with PCOS too, is I don't have a 28-day cycle or a 32-day cycle. I have months and months and months without periods. So I have no way of tracking where my body is. In the event that it does decide to ovulate, I have no way of concretely knowing what's happening. So there again was no way of knowing whether I was ovulating or whether I was not ovulating. I didn't know. So I was not in a place in any way, shape, or form to have a child, and I did not want a child by this friend. He's a very funny guy. He's my age. He really meant a lot to me in terms of getting through certain parts of my divorce. That being said, not relationship material, not father material, not the person I wanted to sleep with. It wasn't even a reckless decision. It was very purposely thought out. Nothing I do is ever reckless or rash. I don't make rash decisions. I think through and talk through every single thing I do in my life. So this was another situation where it was like this debate between friends about whether or not I wanted to make this choice and what were my reasons and all that. So I pointedly make this choice. What I did not do was make the choice for there not to be protection. My husband was the only person I had ever slept with. Didn't plan on sleeping around. I still am not interested in sleeping around. I've slept with this one person and never again since, and it's months and months after the fact. So I was not prepared, which I've learned that lesson. If that's something that I choose to start doing, I will be an empowered woman and take control of my own life in that manner. But so as much as of the choices that I made on my own, I did not choose for there to be that risk involved. So all that summarized to say that I did make the choice to take the morning after pill. So I read a lot about the fact that if you're over a certain BMI, it is not successful. I read about if you have PCOS, it could not be successful, or it could be successful. Nobody really knows. So what I could not find was what happens to our bodies during that whole process. So from my perspective, I don't know if there was any possibility of me being pregnant. And I think that having PCOS, that's just a given. So I have no idea whether I could have been at risk of getting pregnant or not. However, I will talk about what happened. So within a couple of days, I was in the most intense hormonal roller coaster in my entire life. So clearly, even if there was no pregnancy for it to prevent, it worked, and it screwed me up for months after the fact. So I spent weeks spending at least $100 on pregnancy tests trying to make sure, because the symptoms that you go through when you take the morning after pill really feel a lot like, oh my gosh, this is the starting of pregnancy. So specifically, I was very moody, like I wanted to murder everybody in the world. I remember going to yoga and doing the most angry, bitter yoga I've ever done in my life, and then driving home and getting something to eat and just wanting to like ram into cars all around me. It was like an uncontrollable rage. And it's like that rage you get before your period. Like when I start my period, it's always like I'm so tense and it's just, there's so many emotions and hormones and it's just on edge. And then in the minute I start to bleed, it's just like, oh my God, that's what it was. I'm not losing my mind. And it was like that, but it was so intense. It was the most intense rage I've ever felt in my entire life. And I bled really, really, really heavy. So I tend to have pretty regular periods in terms of quantity. Is quantity the right word for it? So my periods are relatively normal in terms of how heavy they are. This was not. Like I was hemorrhaging for days, and it lasted like 7 days. So in my constant companionship with Google, that people were saying that was just it causing you to bleed. It wasn't necessarily a real period. So then I'm still panicking, because if that's not a real period, then I still could be pregnant, and there are lots and lots of horror stories. So I will tell you, no exaggeration, it was 2 months of it being this up and down roller coaster of hormones. There was cramping. I would feel like I was getting ready to start my period, and I didn't start my period. There was just heaviness and bloatedness and every hormonal symptom that you could possibly have, I had. But clearly, it absolutely had an effect on me. So it's really hard to describe the amount of havoc that was placed upon my hormone system. For my mood, I feel like it absolutely threw me into a deep depression. I was struggling with it anyway, going through divorce, and I think that it just threw me down into the depths, and I have really had a hard time regulating my emotions. My sleep cycle was really messed up. Intense amounts of pain. I cramped to the point where I was crying at night and crying myself to sleep. It really messed with the inflammation that PCOS causes. So I was really working hard with my diet, and I was really having a lot of pain at that point, to where it hurt to walk sometimes. It really flared up my PCOS big time. I absolutely believe that, because I was doing a lot to monitor my PCOS with diet, and threw me for a loop. So it does affect people with PCOS. I am a big girl, and it affected me still. So I don't think that there is really that much validity to the claims that if you're over a certain weight or if you have PCOS, it's not going to work, because it did something, and months after the fact, it's done something. And I tried to take progesterone pills to start my period like I'm supposed to, and I didn't start a period on them, which of course freaks you out, because then you think that you're pregnant because you can't start a period. So, I mean, the most intense anxiety that I've had in years, it's just everything is heightened. And you really are just in that place where it's like, this is not what my body normally feels like, so maybe I am pregnant. I have to be pregnant. Oh my God, I'm freaking out what I'm going to do. So I think that as a person with PCOS, it's important to really be aware of that risk and be aware of the fact that it's going to affect you in a way that is so intense. And, I'm really don't hope to ever take it again, but I would wonder if, because our periods as people with PCOS and our hormones are so screwed up and intense anyway, I wonder if it is, a more serious version of what others go through taking the morning after pill. And I had talked to friends who had taken it before, and their stories were nowhere near as dramatic as mine. So I think it's really important to talk about those things, as shameful or as controversial as they can be. It's a reality. And yeah, I guess if there are any questions specifically about how things happened, I know that I have spent many late nights Googling PCOS and the morning after pill and different brand names and different side effects, and there was not a whole lot of concrete answers. So I would just like to offer myself as a woman with PCOS, and PCOS to the severity that it affects every area of my life and my body, as a resource for somebody. So if you are doing one of those late night Googles, YouTube searches of women with PCOS and the morning after pill, I would gladly answer your questions to the best of my ability.